Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Oregon City Council Committee of the Whole meeting of April 1st, 2024. Time is 7:01. If you would join and stand me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, being a committee of the whole meeting, there is no requirement for attendance from members of council, but let the record show that all members of council are here and present this evening. Also joining us is Mayor Michael Sfarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, Law Director Melissa Purpura, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Finance Director Nick Roman, and our Building and Zoning Commissioner Stephen Schrake. With that said, folks, we'll move right into the agenda for this evening. We have no minutes or anything to approve, so at this point we'll call persons and delegations. As we've been doing with a number of people signing to speak, we'll try to limit discussion to 3 to 5 minutes. We won't do a hard stop on anything. We'll try to just give you a wave, let you know so you can start wrapping up comments or concerns as you go from there. May or may not be questions or dialogue back from council or members from the administration. So with that said, we'll start with Mrs. Price. We'll have you come forward. Are you? Okay. On which item specifically? Okay. Would you like a copy of the agenda? Okay. Okay. All right. We'll pass from now. Next on the list, we have Tom Lambert. Tom, we'll have you come up, say your name and your address for the record, please.
Tom Lambert, 5238 Seaman Road, Oregon. I'm up here to address the your item 66 of 2024 with the approving the right of entry on the Bleer Street for Mr. Mantufo. I don't know this gentleman, but he has not followed any rules that Mr. Roman has set to this date or zoning. He's went in there and did removal, which was not even on his property. He's driven on, off the stoned shoulder and all kinds of things, argued with the neighbors. And at this point, he has the field tore up where he's coming in from the Lutheran home property. I know the guy wants to build there, but my biggest concern is that he's going to tear up my property. And, he hasn't listened to anything that you guys have said to this point.
Tom,
He's done whatever he's wanted.
Mr. President,
Mayor.
and we'll have Mr. Roman address this. Would you be okay if we wait till this item comes up?
No, that's fine.
And
I just want- I
and
just
invite
figured
you
you
back
wanted to do
up?
that. That's
I
fine.
think it might be more appropriate.
No, that's okay. That'll work. I'm okay with that.
We're good. We'll call you back up right before the item comes to consideration for this evening. Christine Gladjo. Yeah, we'll just have you state your name and your address for the record, please.
Christine Gladjo, 512 South Lallendorf. I forgot to write the number on, but it's to address the proposed increase in our income tax. And so I ran some numbers and I just have a few questions for all of you as you take this under consideration. I looked at all the financial statements that were posted, and there's some significant items that have come across that I would like to, if not today, get some answers to that would justify an increase. It looks like a 0.25 increase in taxes would generate $4.2 million. And I believe that amount of money may go to the general fund. So I'm not sure what that increase is going to be directed. If it's for safety and welfare, I would propose doing a levy for the police and fire. Actually, 28 years next week, the fire squad came to my house and delivered my daughter. So I absolutely support fire and police, but I think that should be a levy where we could promote that as Oregon supports our fire and police versus an income tax, which is 1% higher than all the surrounding areas. All of the suburbs of Toledo are at 1.5% income tax. Why do we need to be so much higher if we're trying to attract more citizens? That's one question. We've had a negative growth rate in population of just under 0.5% year over year. So adding this increase in income tax restricts our ability to grow. This is my opinion. In 2022, there was a $14 million increase in income tax. That was a one-time advance payment from a City of Oregon business. What did you spend that money on? It almost equals the amount that we've invested already in the Oregon Town Center. Was that money used for that? And why wouldn't we have put that aside for our fire and safety and police versus spending it on property that we don't even own, that we're leasing for 5 years? Those are my questions that you may not have answers to today. And then in 2021, our investment was not income, it was a loss of over $500,000. In previous years, it averaged $1.5 million. That was a loss of $1.9 million. I should have had some water. I'm an accountant, so I get passionate about numbers. So in 2022, we had investment losses of $1.6 million. That is a $3 million loss out of our general fund. What happened to our income? In these years, 21 and 22, we should have had a 13% income on our investments. Why are we showing a loss? Also in 2022, we had that scam, which netted a loss of almost $400,000. Where's that money? Are we getting that recouped? I think that's it for today.
Very good.
Yes.
Mr. President,
Thank you, ma'am. Mayor.
and Ms. Scladio, I'll start to address some of them. I don't know where your figures come up with 4 point some million. I believe the 0.25 will generate 2.7 million, and our finance director's here. And is it, am I not correct?
Based on what our average municipal net income tax is, yes, it would be closer to 2.5 million. Last year was an outlier year, and that's one of the things that we deal with in the city, is that we have net profit payments that are out of the norm. And last year and the year before were both years that were out of the norm. So in a typical year, it'd be closer to 2.5 million.
And then when you said we have show different losses of revenue from prior years, that's very common to the city of Oregon. We do not usually consider any year average year because of fluctuations from our industry. On any given year, we could get $8-10 million more one year and lose that net profits earnings for several years where the business industry don't show it. So we project our revenues based on an average of many years. So over average, we say a pretty consistent, where we've been about 26 million. And I'll refer to our finance director, but it is impossible to chart what the city of Oregon is going to make from year to year, not knowing how industry does their taxes. It reflects on our income dramatically.
We've been consistent in our income tax revenue. We've dropped about 4 to 5%
We have not been consistent.
If you look at what's reported on the
Yeah.
financial statements,
See, if you look, we have to give refunds different years that they file. So we've been anything but consistent. We've never been consistent.
correct me if I'm wrong, and I didn't bring the trend, but you're about 20 million to 19.5 million in income tax revenue. And then you had a property tax increase about 9% from 21 to 22.
What does that do?
Property, well, that's the property tax revenue that came in because our valuation of our property.
Yeah, but that doesn't do anything for the city. We get 4% of the property tax.
But it did increase on your financial statements and into your coffers, our coffers.
Which
by
have,
9% year over year. And you can look at the financial statements and how we're reporting revenue, if you track that revenue trend. And what I'm going to have for you next week is a comparison to Sylvania, Harrisburg, of where they spend their funds.
Okay.
What I'm saying, Mayor, is I don't believe that income tax is appropriate. I think it looks bad for the city of Oregon. If we want, we should support our police and fire. It
Yeah.
should be a levy that is designated for those funds, so you can't move it into the general fund and make unknown purchases going forward.
So-
Support our fire and police with a levy, which we would all support, and don't increase our income tax.
on what we have read over the years is, yes, if we're gonna continue to increase services of our safety services, which we are doing, there's gonna be about $3 million increase. And if we have the $3 million increase to do that, we have to pay for it some way. And you're suggesting a property tax or a levy account that people vote in. And, all right.
Ms.
I-
Clegg,
what-
if
let
I
me
may,
finish.
hang on one second. If you're going to converse back and forth, I'm going to ask you to step back to the microphone just so we can. That's okay.
So we have made a conscious decision to allow the voters to decide. It's not, we aren't putting it on. We're giving them the option to present that for them so they can vote if they choose to fund the fire service and the police services by an income tax. And if they don't, we would see about a possible levy for property tax. We have found people here do not want the property taxes levied. The workers, there are more workers that do not live in the city than do. So we, in essence, are getting the workers that are working in the city pay the bulk of the cost of that levy. It's not, you're shaking your head, but that's the way it works. It's the workers that are working that pay the payroll income tax. And we have more people that work in the city than live in the city and work. So we got all the people that are working here, whether it's at the refineries, the hospitals, or the school system, those are several of our largest employers, where they're paying that 2.5%, and they are covering most of that cost. Senior citizens and the bulk of our community don't want to see their property tax go up. They'd rather see it on the payroll income tax, and we're merely giving them the option to decide when they come to the polls on November, if that's the way they want to pay for the extended safety services, or if there's other means that they want to pay for it. But that's why we're trying to give them the choice. Okay, that's fair.
Very good. Anybody else from the administration, Mr. Roman, Mr. Mazer, anything to add? No? Okay, thank you, Ms. Clegg. Next person we have is Sandy Husband. And again, ma'am, if you just state your name and your address for the record, please.
Sandra Husband, 4331 Morning Dove. California. I was on the 066 also on the taxes. I'm under the understanding that the new tax is for another fire station. Is that correct?
May
I would just answer, there's a part of that for an update to what would be Fire Station 42, which is the one over on Wheeling Street,
Okay.
as a planned project for what, the next couple of years to come.
Why didn't we build this big fire station over there where the most population is? We built that big fancy fire station out there off Wynn Road, which is not very populated at all, where they have to travel so far to get downtown. Why didn't we build that somewhere where there is more population and then maybe made a substation out there where it wasn't as big and elaborate and we would not have that tax? I'm all for the fire department and our police station and everything, but to build two elaborate fire stations in Oregon, one little town, you don't have that anywhere. Why are we gonna have it here? And like this lady has spoken, we're paying more taxes than anyone. I come from Perrysburg, lived Perrysburg for years and years. We're paying more here than we are in Perrysburg. So I just didn't understand, if that's what this income tax raise is for, why didn't we think ahead and put that down in the main part of where there's more population than out there, clear out there on Wynn Road, where they have to travel so far to either get to rescue or get to a fire.
Mr. President.
So,
Yes, Mayor, go ahead.
And I'll start, and I have other support from the administration to say, number one is that is not the main reason to have the payroll income tax increase, because operations, if we do build a fire station, and we may build a second fire station, that's a one-time cost. We paid over many years, but
Right.
the main cost is the additional personnel costs in operating year to year. That does not go away. In fact, it would increase as pay ranges go up, and as we increase the amount of people, as the population increases, as we increase more firefighters to each of those stations. We initially built it out here, and it's strategically located in reference to rail crossings, and we still have to get to each part of the city, even though you're saying the
Right.
population is heavier there. Life squads and our echo unit are out on the streets and can still get to the people with because they're mobile style units. But strategically located, that's where that station is, kind of in the center of the city. It can get in a fire situation into the industrial area. It is strategically located. It was by plan. It was not a mistake.
Okay. So you're saying we still would have had this tax increase if you would have built it over here?
I would say that, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And you'll see in your other surrounding communities that have paid on call systems, which they're all experiencing a great amount of difficulties making fire calls in any timely manner at all. They're facing the same situation we did. We just started addressing it a little earlier, but you'll see all the surrounding communities that have paid on call systems in a very similar situation to us that we are in. And a lot of them use us as a reference of how they're going to address their problems in the future. So we hope we're ahead of the curve.
Okay. All right.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Price? Yeah, still waiting? All right. We'll move into the agenda items. I do want to thank everybody for their participation tonight. And Tom, just wave at me. We'll make sure we call you back up. Right after we do the presentation of that, we'll bring you up to speak at that point in time. That works for time-wise. All right, so the first item on the agenda for this evening is item 62 of 2024, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and City Administrator Joel Mazer. And we'll go to Mr. Mazer on this.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, council. So I know we've talked about this in the past at length at budget meetings and in a committee meeting. At this point, we do have the contract drafted, which is attached. The team of us, me, Mr. Roman, and Mr. Shrake, went through the RFQs, went through the RFQ process. We advertised it. We received 4 proposals, reviewed them, interviewed OHM, and we deemed their proposal in their interview to be the best qualified consultant to update the comprehensive master plan. So with that said, we budgeted $150,000. We have the contract amount set at $148,850. This, I don't know how much more. I don't want to rehash everything that we've already discussed in previous meetings, so I'm trying to keep it brief. But this process takes anywhere from a year to 18 months to go through this, and we think we've got the best qualified consultant to do this, and the project manager for this with OHM, even though their office is in Sandusky, his office is in the Columbus area, but he does have ties to this area. He's from the Northwest Ohio area and does have ties to Oregon, so he's very familiar with our area. And with that, I guess I'll leave it up to council for any questions or comments, and leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, anybody else from the administration? Any comment on item 62?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake?
I got a couple questions. I know, I don't know how long ago it was, we had the meeting. It was probably month and a half ago. I asked the question, how many times has the master plan, I call it a rule book, been looked at and used? And then I was told it wasn't something that's etched in stone, because I do realize things change. But I just have a problem with coming up with something, and if you're not going to go by it and ever look at it, why spend the money?
Great. If I may respond, Mr. President.
Please go ahead, Mr. President.
There are a lot of reasons, and I think that if you put together a good master plan, I mean, this, number one, this is the best way to engage the public, hands down. So I think the public engagement is important, updating it is important, and then sticking to it. Not everything in a master plan gets accomplished, and that was one thing that, and you can ask any planners or anything like that. If you get, they'll say that if you get 50% of the things done in a master plan, that's a victory. So it is used. A lot of it's used for grant writing too. So I just want to point that out is, when you have an updated master plan, and you use it wisely, you use it to write grants for whatever projects that you're working on and whatever you're trying to accomplish. So that's up to us at this point to decide if we want to go through this process, update the master plan, and then follow it. So that's up to the leadership, all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur. Mr. Drake, anything further?
Yeah, I just got one more. I know it's in this packet. I'm not going to look through it. They have 3 council people on it, and then it listed some other people throughout the city to be on it. Who has the final say of who's on it, as far as I nominate this person, this one, and this one as residents? And I mean, who's the one that has the final say? All right, we don't want Paul Drake on there because he asks a lot of questions. I'm curious on how that process would work for people that were here 20 years ago when it was evolved.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mazur.
Thank you. I don't know how it happened when it was done 20 years ago, but I can say that I think it would be better for all of us to bring OHM on and then go through that selection process for the steering committee and just have them kind of coach us on how what that makeup of the steering committee looks like. And then I think the decisions get made in here and with guidance from council and the committee chair. I think that those decisions get made, going through that process. So I think the best move for us is to have, bring OHM on board and use their guidance to help us, because they've done this so many times before with other communities, how to go about the process. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur. What I would say with that as well is just to give a high-level view for those who aren't familiar, don't know exactly what that process looks like. As Mr. Mazur talked about, it could take a year, give or take a few months, from that start of the process to the end. So there would be a steering committee. And I would say that any one of us as members of council or as part of the administration can bring a name forward to recommend somebody to that. That discussion would take place to OHM. I believe they're trying to limit that group. I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say it was somewhere between 10 to 12 individuals in the steering committee. They would use a combination of public meetings, public events, being present at other events for the city to gain input from our citizens, as well as using, online sources, email contacts, surveys, things of that nature to try to, really draw in as much public opinion as possible. So the opportunity to be involved in this could be very different. There will be a steering committee, which will basically be there for pretty much the whole line of the project. But there will be other groups brought together for discussion points, and that would, that steering group and the other points would be members from the schools, members from our business community, appointed or elected officials, could be other people from within our community that would take part in that and help lead that and help organize that to help shape what the plan looks like. And I think that's the overall, just to kind of explain that a little bit of what we're looking like for that. I would just follow up by saying as well, to Mr. Mazur's point, being part of the Economic Development Committee, what we hear a lot is, do you have this plan? Do you have something organized and on paper? I think there's a feeling or belief that an update to this would make it relevant to today's economy, today's lifestyle, today's choices, technology that's available, which would basically just, I'll say, update. So when we talk about update, I think it gives us an opportunity to bring that to a more usable form and something that can be used a little bit more consultative as well. So I do believe that there's value into that as well. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. President,
Ms. Sacrament.
as somebody who's referenced the master plan that we have and had it disregarded and said, says wrong people showed up for it, et cetera, I was told. I'm very interested in the feasibility of having a new master plan. And Mr. Mazur knows that I have looked at a lot of the cities. For a starting point, I looked at the TMACOG members, and I was really impressed. And I remember telling him about the city of Monroe. It has a similar layout to ours in that we're trying to balance industrial with environmental with residential. And I was really impressed. I talked to their administrator and I said, well, how often do you utilize this? How often does it come into play? And he said, every single day. And he said, if something is brought up and they want to go in that direction, we hold it up to that plan. And if it doesn't mesh with that plan, it doesn't move forward, which I was impressed with and got me kind of excited about the idea of maybe this, let's do this. And, but I'm having issues with if we need to tax the people further, I'm not sure I can get behind $148,000. And mostly I had some red flags pop up. So, and Mr. Mazur knows, I've really been, and Steve Cylinder knows, and I've been on the fence. Yes, no, do it, don't do it. What's the value? I mean, I think we could pay for a grant writer to have on staff full time for $148,000 that could achieve that same goal. But when I found out that you were looking strongly at OHM, and really, I don't know about anybody else, but I didn't have any input about that. It was sort of like, here's who we want. And when I found out that OHM is a member of OEDF, Oregon Economic Development Foundation, and I read through what you gave us on the agenda, and there were just red flag words that came up, but when I see what they consider a stakeholder, task 3.3 stakeholder interviews, this includes organizations such as the hospital, Regional Growth Partnership, TMACOG, then Oregonian Club, Senior Club, the youth, and other local organizations. I really have a very strong feeling, really gut feeling, and I'm nervous even talking about it, but I really feel like going with OHM is they're going to move right with OEDF, and they're going to do whatever the administration's steering them toward. And so I wish we could go back to the drawing board with that one, or maybe, get somebody that's going to be more about the well-rounded community and not with just a focus on what our administration is looking to steer our city, the direction they want to go into. That was my concern.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. President, if I could make a comment.
Mr. Roman.
Well, I think you can debate what you want on whether to do a master plan update. I personally think it's needed, but OHM is an excellent firm. And they have done the road work in the Oregon Town Center so far for the residential area. But, the fact that they applied for this qualification statements as well, that they had Perrysburg Comprehensive Plan, the Toledo Warehouse District. They've had a lot, Avon Lake. I mean, these are great cities close to our area, and they had very good references. I mean, they are an excellent firm. There's likely a lot of Toledo engineering firms that are in that Oregon Economic Development Foundation member. And to what degree do you pick and choose just because they have a membership to that? I just want to speak up for OHM. They are an excellent firm. And I can tell you, when it comes to the master plan, to Mr. Drake's questions, the future land use plan is the end tool. It is about where do you want this city to go? Things have changed. You don't necessarily go to the big boxes to buy things anymore. You use your phone. That's completely different than what we used 20 years ago to figure out what people wanted. We were, coming up with Kohl's and, Home Depot and things like that. It's not that anymore. And I think you need a master plan update. I mean, what does the city want to move to for the future, for the next 20 years? I mean, there shouldn't be a huge debate on that. And I think a lot of cities do use comprehensive plans a lot more than this city, but I can tell you from the very beginning, which I was involved with, council was not involved with the original plan. And even the administration was very limited. I was one of the few people involved. We did write it to be used as a tool for zoning meetings and planning commission and so on, but it wasn't used to the degree that it needs to be used as. So I thought for sure you guys would be on board for this, but I think the city needs this plan update. And I think your involvement, which includes council needs to be involved in the steering committee. And you represent a lot of people who voted you in. You would think you would be the people you would go out to the people who voted for you and get their input, to be a part of this, to chime in on what they want. I think this plan is extremely important. Just giving my opinion.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Wallensack.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Roman, you brought up a point there that I wanted to ask. Outside of council and administrative input and participation in this, moving forward, how can we make this, if we move forward with this, how do we make this next one better and more useful for the administration?
I think last time when it started out, you did have involvement with council, but the volunteers kind of fell away. They stopped coming. And I don't think we reached out to the whole body of the city. The more urban area had almost no voice. The people that had maybe more to lose, which was like the entire east side being the residential, the farming community. They were involved more because they had more to lose. It was undeveloped land, and they did show up. Okay, but I think there's a huge population that didn't show up, and I think we need to reach out to everybody. It needs to be a cross section of the entire city, you know. And you would hope, and I know we've questioned the use of Facebook and things like that. I get that, but there's things like Survey Monkey and things like that that consultants use to get data. Clearly, that the idea of getting information from people by Facebook or for social media has to be done. But I think it's really staying on picking good steering committee members to stay involved. Council has to be involved. Administration has to be involved with this. That wasn't done last time, so that's my recommendation.
Well, I do believe that council's involvement will be present in this if we move forward. Outside of you, we definitely would need the administration to make a good effort to be involved with that, as well as our community and getting people that have a cross-section of the community involved in this. It's the only way it's going to be good. And we would have to push in that direction to make sure everybody's involved and stays involved in the process to the end.
Correct.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you,
President?
Mr. Wallensack.
Mr. President?
Ms. Ackerman.
Just one question.
Sure.
Maybe I should get it more down to the nitty gritty of it. I have no doubt, and as I told Mr. Major and that I've always felt if they redo the master plan, I'm in at 110%. I'm all over it. I'm going to dedicate to being on it. And I know what Councilman Drake was getting at, like how is the steering committee selected? Who does the selecting? I think is what we're curious about. But what I want to ask all of you, everybody up here, when I see that they've listed TMACOG as one of the major stakeholders in this, what role do you see? I mean, we're looking at issues of consolidation and trying to determine home rule for ourselves. And I know there's times when you can work together with other communities in your area, but we also know that there's times when, like the county, for example, wants to come in and, make use of what you have going on there. But what role do all of you see TMACOG having as a major stakeholder in what is an Oregon master plan?
Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Major, go ahead.
Just what role does TMACOG have? I think when they list out the names of organizations, I think they're just kind of grabbing some of the organizations that are in there that they would be working with. That's not an exclusive list. So if there are other organizations that they're going to get a hold of, they will. And if the steering committee says, hey, we feel that this group should be, this is a stakeholder, then they'll comply and we'll contact that group too. So it's not just, that's not an exclusive list. I think they're just listing some examples. TMACOG, well, let me back up. Let me zoom out for a second. In a master plan, a big portion of the master plan, or at least a component to it, is transportation. Transportation is an item that's referenced in most master plans that I've read. And so TMACOG, roads, grants, bike trails, things like that are going to be, and if there are other, grant opportunities, putting something in a master plan to sort of connect the dots, I think would be very beneficial to us in the future when applying for grants. So transportation is a big component of a master plan. That's why I want to the TMACOG reference that you had. I just wanted to touch on that. And it's not just TMACOG, but like I said, other regional organizations may be involved in that process too. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Ms. Ackerman, anything further? Okay. And the piece of that I would say is I do believe that they were trying to cite area organizations. I think most, if not all of us sitting up here have the same posture to making sure that this document is the will of the Oregon community, not those around it. However, we do have resources and experts around us that could be beneficial and helpful into the process. But again, I think that speaks to, what we've talked a little bit about here tonight and what we talked about, I think it was about 6 weeks ago to Mr. Drake's comment when I added as new business to have that discussion. We as a council, we as an administration have to embrace the process and also believe in the process and drive the process to make sure that we do get a very usable outcome to the end of this master plan so that when it's done, we feel good about what we're using. And we do use it as a tool, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, it becomes an opportunity for us to reflect back to the plan, knowing that it's a plan, it's not a rule book, but it gives us a plan. But I think the more diverse we can make our cross-section of people involved in that, and I think utilizing either regional or local assets and resources are going to be a key component to that. But again, that's why the steering committee has the ability to also help drive that. And by us being engaged in part of that process, I think we have an opportunity for a better outcome to the whole thing, would be my say.
Mr. President,
Mayor.
I'm going to bring up one other factor in what we didn't have the last time we had the master plan created was, as Mr. Roman alluded to, in retail business, people shop differently than they did before. They do a lot of online shopping. But one of the things that's happened since the last time is, especially since COVID, is we got accustomed to Zoom meetings. And before, it was very difficult to get people to come to this building and have meetings for the master plan. There was a lot of them, and people just didn't have the time in their schedules, or it was tough for them to make. We use Zoom meetings here in the city for meetings all the time with a lot of success. So with the availability of that as an option, I think we have the ability to get more people interested for the whole long term. We had a lot of people interested in our last master plan at the beginning, and in a few short meetings, we no longer did. So we can take advantage of the technology that's out there and hope for a whole lot better success this time than we did in the past.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to move item 62 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to move item number 62 of 2024 to next week's regular meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Reeves. We have a motion by Mr. Wallenzeck, seconded by Mr. Reeves to move item 62 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 62 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Next item on the agenda, again presented by Mayor Micah Safarian and City Administrator Joel Mazer, is item 63 of 2024, and we'll go to Mr. Mazer.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we had some people come up and ask questions about the potential of putting an income tax raise on the levy for this November. So what I wanted to get into right out of the gates is why an income tax? And before I answer that question, because we've already, and I know we've already discussed this in committee meetings. So, but I think it's good for us to sort of rehash this for education for anybody that's watching or anybody that wants to review this later. But why an income tax? But first I want to talk about why not the other options. So a property tax, it does affect everybody. An income tax doesn't affect as many residents, as many people, and it does catch more non-residents. So property tax does catch, all of the residents here. There is an option. Somebody brought up some other communities that have lower income taxes. Well, a lot of those communities also have a reciprocity tax, so that if you live inside of the city and work in another city and pay income tax there, you don't have to pay the income tax within the city, even though you're getting those services. But what a reciprocity tax does is if you work outside of the city and live in the city, you still have to pay city income tax where you live. So it's almost like you're getting taxed by the city that you work in and also getting taxed by the city that you live in. So the reciprocity tax It's a 0% reciprocity tax in the city of Oregon right now. So there's also no garbage fees right now. That's all handled through the general fund. And there are a lot of things that city council could do with, assessments and assessing road projects and things like that. That's not something that's typically done. Everything's done out of the general fund, everything. So, Nick and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's very little other than what we get from the state. And, obviously water funds and sewer funds are handled separately. So I don't know if everybody knows that as well, but those are totally separate enterprise funds. Those have to be by state law. So you can't use water funds to pay for fixing roads. That's just an example, but there are a lot of reasons why not these other options, but why the income tax. More non-residents are the ones that actually have to pay that. So a lot of the workers from the refineries actually live in Southeast Michigan. I don't know if a lot of people know that or not, but those non-residents are the ones that are paying that income tax. So yeah, and less residents, especially seniors, are affected by the income tax. And the last thing I'll note is that this is voted. So what city council is reviewing right now is to put this legislation for vote next week. If they vote it in, then this would go to the ballot for the voters to decide if they want this or not. But what would this do if this passes? It would provide, and this has been discussed in prior meetings, but what we plan to do is hire 12 new full-time firefighters, in addition to the firefighters that we have now. Hiring and creating a position for one police captain. Renovation of the police department, which hasn't been done, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been in that facility for a long time, and it really wasn't built originally for a police department. It was just kind of shoehorned into that building and kind of cobbled together over the years. So it's kind of a maze. So if you have a criminal escape inside of there, it's gonna be hard for them to get out because it's not very easy to get through. So also, as someone mentioned, fire station number 42 would be renovated as a part of this or reconstructed. And there's a feasibility study going on right now to see what would work best. Well, since the majority of those calls come to from that station, that area, it makes more sense to staff it there 24 hours. So have a crew there at that station 24 hours. And that way they can respond quicker to the majority of the calls that are in that area. Right now, there's no way for anybody to be housed there 24 hours a day because it's not built for, 24-hour living. So those are some of the reasons why for fire station number 2. I know that came up as well. So, but I know, Chief, you have some stats that and some other things to share. I wanted to turn it over to you to talk a little more about, because majority of this is to fund the fire department. Some of it's to assist with the police department as well, but majority of it is the fire department. So I'll turn it over to Chief.
Mr. President.
Chief O'Brien, please.
All right, thanks. Yes, so there is a lot of moving parts here. I'll talk first about, how the Oregon Fire and Rescue Department has changed over the years. So with, as the mayor alluded to a little bit, with the decrease in the amount of, local responders or volunteers or part-time that's available for the call, it's just changed. And that's not simply because they don't want to come, it's because of the call volume has changed. So in the last 10 years, the Oregon Fire Rescue Department has seen a 72% increase in call volume. So 72% increase in call volume is quite a lot of calls for asking somebody that works, a job, or they have kids at home and they have other, priorities that they take care of within their own personal lives to be able to, drop everything they can and respond to the runs. Station number 42 is probably the one that has the most call. We have the most calls in that district, but has the least amount of those local responders as well. And so the way that Station 41, when it was first originally put there, or why it was decided to be put there, was because in reality of our entire 28.3 square mile, that would be the center of that area. So essentially, it was kind of a way of being able to put it somewhere where it could kind of get to every location in a reasonable amount of time, but not in meeting a standard amount of time. So essentially, up in the northern part, in District 3, would be our least amount of runs. So we do about 300, 350 runs up in the northern part of our district. We do about 1,200 to 1,300 in 41's district. And in 42's district, we do about 2,500 runs. So I think the reason now, I can't speak on everything because I wasn't here during the time of in those meetings of when that Station 41 was kind of evolved, but that would be the travel distance of being able to be able to have a big enough fire station, to be able to have enough people there to be able to serve as much of the area as it possibly could from that single location. So then you have all the personnel in that location, but then the amount of staffing that it is, with that increase of 72% over that last 10 years, we average about 9 to 10 runs per day. 33% of those calls are overlapping calls, which means we could have 3 EMS calls happening at a time. We could have a motor vehicle accident and an EMS call. We could have a structure fire and a motor vehicle accident and an EMS call. It just doesn't matter. It could be a multiple different types of calls as well. But with that being said, it also says that's a different amount of personnel for each one of those types of incidences. So if it's 3 just general ill person EMS calls, that would only require about 6 individuals. But if it's a motor vehicle accident and an EMS call, that could require anywhere from 7 to 9. But if it's a cardiac arrest and a different type of call, as you see what I'm getting at, it requires many different types of amounts of personnel depending on the incident. So how we've come up with of why we're here today is we did do a community-driven strategic plan. And we brought in stakeholders from the group. This is after we conducted an internal strategic plan to kind of look at what we need to do internally to fix moving forward to better serve all the residents and the citizens of Oregon. There's about 3,568 calls for service that we get called to each year. So we had to try to identify what is the best, most economic and fiscal responsible way of being able to do this. Talking to all the stakeholders, our number one threat and our number one weakness on our SWOT analysis was our staffing levels. And in the staffing levels completely relate to, response times, and they want us to show up in a reasonable amount of time with the appropriate amount of people to be able to resolve whatever incident that is. As you've seen last week, we did ask for approval to apply for the SAFER grant. So the SAFER grant would be it's a grant that we are trying to do our very best of looking for extra funding outside of the city to be able to at least pay for the staffing. And what that SAFER grant does is it pays for the staffing for a 3-year period. Now, a big part of this grant is to be able to talk about a sustainability plan. And also within our community-driven strategic plan, one of the goals within that is to identify a sustainability plan. As we've looked back in the history of the finances within Oregon, there is a heavy ebb and flow of finances. So in the way that our services are, they're consistent, ongoing there on a regular basis. And personnel costs, they don't ever go down. We're looking at essentially 1.7 million for the first year. And then it goes up to 1.8 million and then just over 2 million in a 3-year period. So as that continues to grow, but it also puts 4 firefighters at station number 42 every single day. They do work a 24, 48-hour shift. It would not change anything else with our operations as far as having our local responders. They would still be and needed to be dispatched for structure fires and for other motor vehicle accidents that involve extrication or other higher acuity calls that always, consistently that we see. The reason why Station 42 itself as the facility is brought into this is because, If you remember when Station 41 was being constructed, there was staff coming out of Station 42 and out of Station 41 over when it was just down the road on Seaman. Station 42, the quarters that was put in Station 42 was just for temporary quarters. It's not approved under the building code to be able to actually just move in and occupy it if we wanted to today. So we did take the approach that we did budget to do a feasibility study to kind of help us from the experts to be able to understand, is the structure able and to just be able to remodel the facility? Or does it have to be a reconstructed facility? We don't have those answers right now today, but that's what this income tax levy would do as well, would be a piece of where, yes, we would have the personnel, but we do need a place for where they would actually be stationed at. But we don't know if that would be a remodel and or a reconstruction. And I can tell you from my point of view, it really doesn't matter to me, whichever one it was. What matters to me the most is the personnel. Because in order for us to effectively take care of all the incidences that we get dispatched to, we got to have the proper amount of personnel. So another question that might get asked is, how do we add up to maybe local areas, Perrysburg City or Springfield Township or Sylvania? And I could tell you that, so where Oregon sits with 24 full-time on the line operation, and we do about 3,500 calls. In comparison to Perrysburg City, they do just over 3,000 calls, and they have 27 personnel. And I have talked to their chief over there. They are looking to hire 9 individuals over the next 3 years as well. And then if you jump into like Springfield Township, where they do a little bit more runs, they have about 5,000 runs, and but they have 49 on their staff is what they have. Sylvania would be around 8,000 runs, and they have just around 76 personnel. And then, but similar sized cities to us, but a little bit farther away would be like the city of Sydney. Very similar population. They have and similar run volume. They would be at like 33 individuals. So putting us at 12 new firefighter positions would put us at that 33 full-time individuals, or 37 with chiefs. But the idea would be to have 11 full-timers per day, plus the 2 part-time, is how that staffing model would work. If we were at that full staffing, and if we were at full staffing to have 13 total, which would be the 11 full-time and the 2 part-time, that would give us the 3 ambulances in service, an engine in service, a truck, and a battalion chief. And so, but the way that firefighter schedule works, we also have to take into account the time off and where that lies at too. So on average, we might be in that realm of 10 to 11 people on duty per day, which essentially at 11 would still give us the 3 ambulances, an engine, and a truck, with just less amount of people on each, the engine and the truck, and the battalion chief. But if we get to 10, we would be cross-staffing one of those apparatus even at that level. And so the other question is like, why are we trying to get to that amount of personnel? It's all within a standard. So in the fire service, we can refer to what we call the NFPA 1710 or 1720 standard. We as the city of Oregon, because of our population and size, we fall within the 1720 standard. That would be a combination career and volunteer. And so our goal is to meet 10 personnel assembled on scene in less than 10 minutes, 80% of the time. So in order to be able to accomplish that, that means that from the time of dispatch to the time that the unit is on scene, that's got to be with 10 personnel is in less than 10 minutes. I can tell you in the entire year of 2023, we did not meet that one time. And we didn't meet that one time by one way or another. May have been units on scene, one or 2 units on scene with 1 or 2 of the personnel in less than 10 minutes, but never 10 personnel in less than 10 minutes on scene. that is nearly impossible for us to meet. From April of 2023 till December of 2023, there was only 17 days that we had an engine with 3 people on it. And so, although what that means is that we have individuals that are there that are attached to ambulances and attached to the fire truck sometimes. So for example, if as the staffing is getting established for that day, they may only be, they're on the ambulance, but if the first call is an ambulance call and then the second call is a fire call, there may not be personnel until personnel come in to take a fire truck out. So that's why we won't meet the time frame, but also not have the amount of personnel. So, but I will say, like, we are doing our very best to just try to make sure, like, the last thing that anybody wants is to see taxes raised. I completely, understand that. And it hasn't been but anything for the reasons of trying for us to readjust what we all look like, what our staffing looks like, how it's going to go out, making sure that our response plans are set done. This is why it's critical on this Lucas County Life Squad, and the changes of the Lucas County Life Squad are so impactful for us here in Oregon, because our current minimum staffing right now as it sits today is 6 personnel. Well, I should say 4 personnel, because and the reason why I say 4 is because there's only 4 positions that we as administration can mandatory that there's people there. The other 2 positions are part-time positions that are filled, which makes it 6. So if there's not part-time, if the part-time positions are not filled, that puts us at 4 people. And that means that 2 of those people are attached to the Life Squad as it sits right now today, and they're not dispatched for every run, and they may not be dispatched for any, and they're not to be utilized for fire calls. So there is a lot of moving parts. And sometimes that people see a lot of different, firefighters and people and apparatus. But that's just that's the goal that we're trying to take. So the most people that we could have at that station as it sits today would be 9. And that's assuming that there would be no full-time firefighters off and the 2 part-time positions are filled. So that would be 9 firefighters. And then we'd have 1 battalion chief, which would make 10. That would be the most that we could have today. So I know that's a long dissertation of a lot of different moving parts, but just wanted to kind of give a little bit of, back knowledge to how we got here, and that it's not just something that, just kind of came up overnight. I do have a couple mappings that I did, if anybody's interested in seeing that. I worked with the county to show different locations of where our stations are at. And then the shades, kind of show how long it takes to get somewhere. But I think the most impactful map is this one right here, which shows that this is where station number 1 is. This is a heat map of where all of our calls are at. And this is where station number 1 is, and this is where station number 2 is. So, we do know that the bulk of our calls is in that area, more than double than station number 41. And, but we are not asking for any sort of elaborate fires. You wouldn't see anything remotely close to what you see out at station on Wynn Road right now. Wynn Road is the central headquarters, but is essentially enough staffing to serve all 3 districts in a reasonable amount of time, and also even into the future would be still to serve district number 3. But the fire station at number 2 would simply be a very simple bay to be able to house a truck and a medic unit. So, could be, like I said, the current footprint that it sits now would just a remodel would do us just fine. Or if we find through, structural engineers in the feasibility study and so on and so forth, that may not work, then, obviously then that would be a reconstructed, because I think that building is it's either in the 40s or 50s, and the last remodel being in the 60s. So it is a pretty old building, but we certainly just need the staffing is what we mainly need out of this.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah.
Let me come to it. Let us finish up. I'll give you an opportunity at the end. Anything else from the administration? Okay. Council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Salander?
thank you, Mr. President. I do have some concerns. regarding this. I support the fire department, police department, 100%. There's no question in supporting the people of the fire department. Just some concerns, like I say. One is I really feel that this needs to not be just going into the general fund, that we need to have a separate account that this would just go into for the police and fire alone. Reason why I say that is if the words are not, let me go on to the next one, actually, I'll catch back up. So the other one is I feel that the wording in the levy needs to be very, very specific, that if our citizens and our voters do decide to pass this, and that is their, it is a voter's choice, the wording needs to be very, very specific to be Oregon Police and Fire. Right now, it says in the handout here, we have, it says Police and Fire Divisions of the city. The reason why I feel that it needs to be extremely specific to Oregon Police and Fire is that we are not the bank for Lucas County or our regional council of government. We're not here to make up their poor financial decisions. And if it doesn't say that, I'm concerned about the counties and the bigger picture looking at going towards consolidation of fire. Now, why I say that? Right here, I have a paper that we're willing to share with any of you. This is from 2019 from the medical committee meeting minutes. Specifically, it says that the system may only have sufficient funding for another 5 years. That was in 2019. 5 years is 2024. All the chiefs have agreed to look at the system as well as bring in all the stakeholders of the system. Chief Kuzno said Matt Harriman, which we all know that name, has created a RFP for a consultant to help us review our system. The process will probably take 12 to 18 months. He said the first process, and this is the important part here, is consolidated dispatch. Check. Second, ALS network, and third, ALS network. Check. And third, all fire departments in the consolidation of fire services. So right here in their words, they're speaking of wanting to move towards consolidating our fire. I will not allow that to happen. The reason why this is important also is because back in a safety committee meeting that we had here on February 5th, 2024, the question was asked if the EMS money was from a levy. And Mr. Mazur answered that due to the levy being loosely written, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase here a little bit, but due to the levy being loosely written for EMS money could be used for ALS or anything dealing with safety services. If we're not specific with what we say, that is for Oregon Police and Fire, we need to not have any gray area, because it is important that if we're collecting these taxes in the city of Oregon, our needs come first. Not the county, not to any potential council, governments, or anything else. That we need to protect it to be for our police and our fire, nobody else's. Third, I'm concerned with it being done as an emergency. As an emergency, there are some different things that happen that goes into effect right away, or whatever, what do you want to call it there, as soon as the mayor signs it. That takes away the people's right to have multiple readings of the levy and to be able to question and do their own research as well. It also removes the people's right to challenge any ordinance with a public referendum. We're removing the rights of the people to challenge what we're doing. And that should not ever happen
Mr.
unless
Slander?
absolutely necessary. Yes.
Not to interrupt you, but I do not believe this is being considered as an emergency measure.
Okay, I thought it did say that.
Mr. President, that is correct. Our charter prohibits us from imposing or
Correction. Yeah, I'm sorry, I did
doing
misread
an
that.
income tax
My
levy
apologies.
through an emergency. So our charter prohibits us. So that's
Thank
why
you.
this one is.
I appreciate it.
Didn't mean to interrupt. I just want
No,
to
I
make sure we
appreciate
had that
That
accurate.
was my mistake.
Thank you. Please
I admit
continue,
my
Mr.
mistakes.
Solander.
Oh, that's the next one. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyhow, those are my biggest concerns, that we need to make sure the funds remain in Oregon for our police and fire, our Oregon police, Oregon fire. And that these funds should go into a separate account to keep it out of the general fund, to keep it crystal clear where the funds are coming from and how they're being spent. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Slander.
Mr. President?
Yes, Ms.
Fine.
Purpura.
Thank you. Mr. Slender, you had brought that up. We did look into that from your specific question from last time. And any of the funds that come in for this, it is specific to the police and fire for the city of Oregon. It is specifically designated to that. So that has been looked at and confirmed.
So just to clarify, to make sure I understand, because I had a similar question to Mr. Slanders a few weeks back, and I can't remember if it was in this meeting or if it was in the committee meeting. So we do have these clearly designated as police and fire funds, because I remember a discussion about 49%, 51%. This goes into the general, and we are changing percentages. Can you speak a little bit more to that, please, Ms. Purpura?
So under the statute, under 2A, it says 41% of the 1 5/8 tax rate for the purpose doing all things necessary and incident to the operation of the police and fire divisions. So it is specific to that. And then the 59% goes to the funding of capital improvements and general operating expenses, sorry, within the general fund. So that is specific within the changes to reflect what the proposal would be.
Fair enough, thank you.
Mr. President.
Council, Mr. Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like Mr. Roman to outline where our income tax goes, because the charter does designate where it goes. And as Ms. Purpura just said, 1 5/8% of the income tax would go to police and fire. Please describe how our taxes are laid out by our charter.
So per the charter, it's 2.25% is what our income tax rate is. 1 3/8% goes to the general fund, which is to be broken down currently as 30% for police and fire, 70% for general government. We currently spend about 50-50. So it's not, we're already spending more than that 30% on the police and fire. And then it is about 11% goes into the capital fund, 5.56% goes into a storm sewer fund, and then 22.22% goes into the income tax fund. That is how it is currently broken down. And so what we're talking about is, so it'd go, adding that 1/4% would change the 1 3/8% that gets broken down for police and fire and general government. Adding that 1/4% would take it up to 1 5/8%, which would break it down. So it'd be 41% and 59% for police and fire versus general government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mr. Wallensack. Any further questions?
Mr. President? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Salinger, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. President. So just to clarify, then, there is no gray area of it. It will stay in Oregon, and it cannot be cross-funded or anything else like that towards anything else, not Oregon's police and fire. Is that correct?
We confirmed with outside counsel who specializes in this area that it would go to specifically police and fire of the city of Oregon.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Slander.
Mr. President?
Ms. Ackerman.
So is there a reason why you chose to do the income tax? I like things kind of cut and dry. So where it says that what you had for the appropriations for the 2.25 that we currently have, ordinance number 193.1. So we're splitting that 70-30. You said it's currently 50-50 is what we're actually
It's
spending right now?
Basically, yes, that is correct.
Okay, so, and then it did say like 0.25% does go toward garbage collection. It kind of looks like waters that could get muddied with the way the breakdown is. Is there a reason we can't do a standalone safety levy so that we can make, kind of keep all the buckets in there? I mean, is there a reason why we can't do a standalone?
I have the administration.
I mean, if I may, Mr. President.
Sure.
If you're asking, can we do this is the standalone for the additional for the police and fire services.
If it's income tax.
If it's income tax, are you?
But you're saying like the way that the way that it's written up is that it would continue to be, but who's to say, once you do it, you can't appropriate, change an ordinance, and then make the appropriation, adjust it once we've already passed the levy. So I just think taxpayers, from what I've heard from people, and we all support fire and police, and it would be easier for us to comprehend as taxpayers, regular citizens, if that stood alone, and we could then, if it need be, for some reason, if we needed to have a referendum, you're not handling all of you're not going, it's not going to affect all of these things separately, but strictly police and fire. And I know you're saying if it's going to be an income tax, that's what it's going to be. Is that how you?
If I'm understanding correctly, all of the way that Nick just described and what you have in your hand is split out how our income tax collections are divided up, and how it reads is one of them does have garbage collection kind of lumped in with one of them. Is that? And you're saying that if we could do a standalone if any one of those would have to change, I believe each one of those individually would have to go to as another ballot measure
So we
to
couldn't
change the
reduce,
language.
we couldn't reduce the 30% that's out of the income tax, out of that current 2.25, and have a standalone safety levy, and similar to, what we have across the county as far as for Oregon, our, schools standalone. I know there's a separate entity, but
Yeah.
I know there are cities that have safety levies that are standalone, and I just.
It is. And this one is a standalone. This would be for safety services.
So, but it's going to it's going to go 2.5, and so that's not going to add anything to your, it's going to, so the breakdown according to the.
It's pretty clear.
It'll be an added.
Well, maybe if I was here forever like you, maybe it would be, but you got to give me a learning curve here. So you're saying if you raise it to 2.5, I'm just for the sake of citizens that understand it, then that additional millage will 100% go to safety. See, I don't know the way your ordinance is written, the breakdown would still be these items, these percentages.
1 3/8 to 1 5/8, absolutely, 100% of it is locked in, standalone, just what you're asking for.
So,
Mr.
Mr. President,
That's capital improvements and general fund operating expenses. They're in that same,
Mr. President.
currently 1.375.
Okay, if I may only go over, Mr. Wallensack.
Thank you. I just wanted to, Ms. Ackerman is bringing up a good point, and we need to make this clear as possible for our residents. Currently, we have 1 3/8 of our income tax goes to police and fire. If this passes, am I correct?
It's a split. It's a split, 30 to 70.
Correct.
Okay. That's not what this says.
1 5/8, that increases, and then you're changing your percentages that get doled out from that to 41.59 for that.
To match the equivalent of what is spent each year, which migrates that. So I guess following up to the question, if I could follow up to yours with one of my own, which I think may offer some clarification. So in the move from 1 3/8 to 1 5/8 with the additional 0.25%, if the voters should approve that, how can that be changed? Can that be changed?
Spent somewhere else.
Yeah, can it be appropriated in any place else? If that was proposed to do that for whatever reason, what is this process that would have to go through for that to be appropriated differently? Is that another vote of the people? Okay, so it would have to go back to the ballot for people to vote on if we were changing how that allocation of those funds, those tax receipts are made.
Mr. President?
Ms. Ackerman.
Mr. Roman just said, this is what the appropriation says, and I mean, that's what it states that the breakdown is, and that's what it's you're saying you're telling me that that's what it will be. It will stick to those numbers, but you're currently doing 50-50 and you're not living by this right now. We're not appropriating that. You just said it was 50-50. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, just for 30% currently is for police and fire. The other 70% can be used for any general government, which police and fire is part of the general government. So that's why it's able to go over. If we
So it
change
can
it,
only go in one direction. It will never go in the other
a
direction.
minimum of 30% has to go to police and fire, and that's where this would increase it to a minimum of 41% has to go to police and fire.
And it's 41% of the 1 5/8, not the 1 3/8.
Correct, and
So it
that's
is a
where that
larger
4%
percentage of the larger piece of the pie, if you will.
So, but if you raise the income tax to 2.5, that's not gonna add to any of these other numbers.
Correct. Those other breakdowns would say this exact same percentage of that
Do you see why a standalone safety levy might be easier to understand for everybody in town?
I do see how it could appear that way, but when it actually comes down to funding that fund, it becomes a lot more complicated due to not knowing what any income tax is going to come in any given year.
Mr. President.
Mr. Roman.
And you would still have to adjust those percentages, no matter what, no matter how else you try to do it, you're still going to adjust those percentages. So, I mean, it was 1 3/8, 30% to police and fire, 70% to the other departments, which included police and fire. So you could spend some of that 70% on police and fire, which is what you were doing.
Correct.
Because they didn't have the funding in the past years. So going from 1 3/8 to 1 5/8, you're now appropriately splitting that. But the reality is the police and fire are getting that additional 0.25%. That is the reality. No other department's getting anything. It's strictly police and fire getting the additional 0.25%.
So it can't,
Thank you, Mr.
the numbers aren't fluid, but they're fluid.
Well, and that's how
To some
it's written. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, police and fire is in that other percent, just so you know.
So,
Okay.
Mr. President, if I could, so.
Go ahead, Mr. Roman.
Just, I think this might help it make sense, Ms. Ackerman. So for that, the top rate, it's at 0.5%, that goes to, the taxing. That 0.5% of the 2.25% will stay 0.5% of that 2.25. So it will still receive 0.5% of the 2.5%.
Was that supposed to help?
No, I thought it
Nick?
was, I don't know. how- It is complicated. I wish I could explain it a
He's
little
up
bit simpler.
above. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. President,
Mayor, go ahead.
and I know it is hard to follow sometimes, but we have rules to live by to put things on the ballot. And we had issues before with the Board of Elections getting things through. And so what we did as Melissa had stated earlier, we used outside counsel that specialize in this to do exactly what you said, to isolate this additional money into an already isolated account. So it is actually a standalone account. And it goes from 1 3/8 to 1 5/8 of everything we collect goes to police and fire. And we can't spend any of it.
But-
We complement that money with other money that's left in the general fund, but no money from the 1 5/8 would be able to complement anything the other way.
So the 70% for capital improvements and general fund operating expenses. The 1 5/8 is gonna go strictly police and fire, then
No.
the revenue, you're gonna drop that much revenue in your capital improvements and
No,
general
just
fund
say, no,
operating
it's,
expenses?
no, right now,
How does it go from
right now-
1.375 to 1.58, but
because right now, they're guaranteed 1 3/8. And if we raise it 0.25, which is 2/8 onto the 1 3/8, it ends up coming 1 5/8. They'll get 100% of 1 5/8 of everything we collect.
so.
It's a standalone account, just like
Okay.
you're asking for.
Okay,
And
but I'm just going by what we were given for the budget, for the appropriations of the 2.25 income tax, and then you reiterated that of the current 1.375%, 30% for police and fire operations, 70% for capital improvements and general fund operating expenses, of which you're currently spending actually more like 50% out of that is going more to the police and fire, which I'm not questioning it, that you're needing. But you're saying then that 1.58% is now not applying to the capital improvements and general fund, but it is now strictly for police and fire. I'm just saying, you're trying to
but-
pass a tax levy. People want,
Understand that. I think,
Just-
I think there's an attempt. I'm going to start with Mr. Wallensack, Mr. Roman, I'll come back to you. I think there might be an attempt
I
to.
think I think somebody
simplify this.
misspoke. They're trying to attempt to collect 1 5/8. And of that 1 5/8, that is not all going to police and fire. That will get split 41% to police and fire and 59% to the other revenue accounts. So 41% of that, if you would do the math, Mr. Roman was just saying, that 59% of 1 5/8 is equivalent to 70% of 1 3/8.
I don't know why, I just don't get grasped that immediately. Thank you.
Mr. Roman, did you have something to add?
I do, I was.
I was going to say, are your math teaching skills?
Well, trust me, I represent the other departments and I don't want to lose out on this deal, so I purposely went through the math, make sure the other general departments, me, isn't losing out on this. So yeah, and the very first thing I did when I first looked at this was I took 59% of 1 5/8 versus 70% of 1 3/8. They're equal. And with that, okay, no problem. The departments aren't losing anything. They're not gaining anything, but police and fire is definitely gaining more money through this. This is dedicated to police and fire. Unfortunately, that's how our income tax was set up
President.
originally.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Wallensack.
And to Mrs. Ackerman's account or her case, it would be a lot easier if there was just one silo that it went in to separate that out. And I know but on paper, it doesn't appear to be one silo. And that's where Mrs. Ackerman, I believe, is trying to express the public needs to be clear, or we need to be clear to the public that this money is directed towards police and fire safety services in the city of Oregon.
And Mr. President. just
Thank you,
one
Mr.
last-
Wallensack.
one
Ms.
last thing,
Ackerman,
one
please,
last thing.
please.
I really want to know now I know we have a lot of people that show up here and they don't live here. So they don't have to worry about property taxes. And I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I really question how going to 2.5 is going to help attract business or attract residents, because if you can stay outside of Oregon, and I know, 1%, maybe you don't think that's a big deal, but on some folks, that's a huge burden, and they want to keep that money in their pocket. So what's your thought process about going to that 2.5% tax burden for the public when all around, other than Toledo, it is 1.5, or it's, and those are cities that don't have all the industry, don't have, that we have, but I definitely service, have the public safety. And it's hard when you're trying to do apples for apples, because we're a very well-to-do city in our income tax, what comes into us. So I'm not sure it's gonna attract people to want to live here or work here. So please just take that into consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. I know we keep trying to justify our income tax at 2.25 compared to other communities. In the other communities, correct me if I'm wrong, most of them, if not all, have to pay for their own refuge. I know I own a home out in Genoa, and I have to have my own garbage pickup out there. It's not, I mean, they don't, the city doesn't provide that service. With that being said, I'll listen to, what other services that we provide for our citizens out of that 2.25 that other communities, and I'm not bashing any other community, like the, city of Northwood, the village of Walbridge, you know, those surrounding communities that we have. What are they paying?
Mr. President.
In
Or what they're
addition to
not
income
paying for
taxes.
out of their income tax? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. We'll start with the mayor. We'll go to Mr. Mazur after.
And I'll start by, I don't have all that data in front of me right now, but it's hard to compare cities to cities because, as Mr. Roman said before, when a street is repaved, we do not assess the property owners. It is already paid on the tax dollars. A lot of the cities do have special assessments for special services. We do, we're a very full service city. People come to enjoy living here. There's a myth out there that people are moving out. Well, some people do move out, but the average life cycle of a for sale house that's turnkey ready in the city of Oregon is less than 1 week. They sell almost immediately. There's people on waiting lists to buy houses. I was told to me that a house went up for sale and they had 36 offers in like 36 hours. So people are not flying out of our community. People are looking to relocate in the community. People that had gotten letters from for options on their property on Wynn Road and Corduroy had gone around and said, wow, you can't find a house for sale in Oregon. And if you do, it's sold before you can get to it. So it's not that myth out there that it's a terrible place to live and people are running out. That's not accurate. Or we haven't seen it because you go out and look for a house yourself and I think you'll find it hard to find. We decided to put this on as a income tax versus funding it a different way. And we decided to actually go forward with further safety services because we learned some things when the county consolidated our dispatch. People said, boy, if we had the option, we would pay more to keep it here. We didn't have that option, but we do not want that to happen to our fire department. This is one of the reasons why we want to make the grades that the chief has mentioned so that we aren't in threat of losing the ability to run our own fire department. We are ahead of a lot of the other cities that have paid on call. They're experiencing the same thing we have experienced years ago. We are in front of the curve on most of them. I think you'll find a lot of these other communities that have to upgrade their safety services will be looking at some kind of funding source to do it. Whether they choose to do it with the income tax or property tax, I don't know. That'll be a decision they'll have to evaluate their community. We found that especially when people retire, they don't want to see their property tax continue to go up to pay for it. They wouldn't be paying any of this. There'd be others paying it, people that are working. We believe that a lot of the jobs that are in the city are good paying jobs that they may find it not that so cumbersome to pay additional 0.25% those who work here. It's even a better caveat to us that those people, which are quite a few that work here, but don't live here. And they're paying, they're subsidizing us with their payroll income tax that comes to the city of Oregon. So we think it's the most acceptable for the people in our community to pay the payroll income tax versus a property tax or start pay for this service out of our general fund and have to start special assessing other project that we do. If we're going to increase city services and not find a funding source for it, some other department has to give something. We don't want to take anything away from the people. We think we understand it's a high rate compared to some cities around, but if you look at everything that the other cities offer, maybe it's not, maybe this is a better deal. like I said, people seem to be looking for houses here all the time. If you have any realtor friends, ask them. They'll tell you, we can't find houses in the city of Oregon for sale. And if we do, by the time we get there, it's sold. I
Thank
had
you.
a son
Mr.
that
President?
I was going to say, if I may, Mr. Mazer had asked for the floor. I'm going to go to Mr. Mazer.
Yep, thank you. I wanted to touch on one of Mr. Reeves' points. One of the services that is provided for out of the income tax collections here, the 2.25% that it is now, is water and sewer.
So we're gonna.
So
I was
water
gonna
and
say.
sewer funds are actually subsidized by the general fund, which is extremely rare. The only other community that I know of that does that is Bowling Green. And their income tax is high as well. Theirs is one of the higher ones of the area, Bowling Green. I believe they're at 2%. But they also subsidize their water and sewer rates so that we do have the lowest water rates in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
I always
It's our
call
best
that out when I
commodity.
get an opportunity. I say it, I preach it from the rooftops.
Oh.
We have the lowest water rates and low sewer rates. So
Mr.
Hang on,
Mazer?
Mr. Owen, Ms.
Oh,
Ackerman. Go
Mr.
ahead.
The sheet that you gave me back a while ago in your presentation, it says, everybody keeps saying the garbage doesn't come out of this income tax, but it says, so is that
No.
just a portion?
Garbage.
So
No, it
just a
does.
Portion of it?
Yeah,
Or
it-
just, okay, for the.
Yeah, each individual resident doesn't have to arrange for their
Correct.
own refuge pickup. It's
When
a
it-
city
when you do
provided
get yours
service and
picked up,
funded
yes,
through the
nice.
taxes. So, Mr. Roman.
Thank you.
I guess while we're on this subject, you know, I've been looking at this situation for a year and a half because I watch over water and sewer funds. And yes, there is a subsidy for income tax. And one alternative would be get rid of that subsidy, use that money that was used for water and sewer and put that into police and fire. But what does that mean? It means water and sewer rates are going up. Who pays the water and sewer rates? All the property owners, including the seniors. Okay? Seniors who aren't paying it, there's some seniors who aren't paying income tax. So if you went that route, I believe seniors would be hit the hardest because their rates are going up. You're going to hit every property owner with that alternative. You could take the money that was going to refuse collection, say, you know what, we're going to give that to police and fire. But guess who's going to pay the difference for that refuse collection? Every property owner who gets refuse and collection. Yes, Mrs. Price. So again, another alternative where the property owners pay the brunt of this increase. I think in the income tax route, the property owners pay the least of the brunt. That's the difference. So if you vote, I worry about what I say or don't I say of what's legal and what you can't say. All I'm saying is if you don't vote for the income tax, the other alternatives, it's going to be more on the property owners to pay for the police and fire, no matter how you cut this. So I think they're going to get, property owners are going to hit the hardest, whether it's through water and sewer rate increases on refuse, or some other means. I think the income tax, using the money from people who may just work here but don't live here, they're paying the bill. If we don't go that route, the property owners are going to pay more. That's my view.
Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Ms.
When we
Ackerman.
spend tens of millions of dollars procuring properties throughout this city and have done so for well over a decade, it's really hard for the citizens to say, no, we're not going to take it out of our little spending spree. It's going to be, if we're going to get you in property taxes, or we're going to get you in an income tax. It's a threat. It's a threat, and it's one that I don't think citizens it's not, when they see the spending and it's like we can drop millions, like boom, it's really hard to swallow hey, you're going to pay here or you're going to pay here. It's an approach that's not
Understood.
really flying with the public much anymore.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman.
Mr. President,
Mayor.
and people, they may not have confidence that we'll be able to fill our industrial site. I, for one, believe we will. I don't think those same people, if we are successful, when they see the revenues coming in at a great, huge rate and the school system flourishing, they might reevaluate their opinion. And I believe we not only made an investment, but we made a very smart investment. Without it, we could fall behind. So we're trying to look for the future. And anytime you look for the future, you got to invest in it. And we're invested. And I think we'll see a huge return from that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. President?
Mr. Solander.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think people have a hard time believing and having faith in what is coming out of the administration when we drive down Navarre and see an empty, broken down, weedy-filled parking lot for the last 5 years, and all we've gotten for it is a sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Solander.
Mr. President,
Mayor.
once again, investment. You'll learn as the longer you sit here that retail isn't driven by politicians, it's driven by the market. And had we not invested, and I'll still say that's an investment, we would have only seen development that we currently see on Navarre Avenue as it currently sits. It was always said we couldn't have a town center in Oregon. Well, if we didn't purchase it, that would have been correct. We still have that opportunity. It may take some time, but especially if we are able to get some huge industrial venture and whatever it may be, we're looking at a couple now. If that doesn't work out in the future, we will get more attention from the retail market that take us more seriously, and we'll have something we can be proud of. Yes, yes, you have to be patient. You'll learn that you do have to be patient here. I know you're not, because you've expressed that many times. But I am patient. I've been around a long time, and I've seen that it took 35 years to put in the Millard Avenue overpass. It took 24 to put in the Seaman Road and 25 or 6 to put in the Navarre Avenue overpass. It doesn't work fast, but when it does, it pays off. We're starting to see the return. We're seeing Oregon has the opportunity to develop retail where it was said it could never happen. And yes, some of us have patience and are willing to take a risk, and we don't see it as that much of a risk. We see it as an investment. And I think the longer you sit here, you'll start to feel the same
Mr.
way.
President, since the
Ms.
mayor
Sacrament.
alluded to the housing crisis, the city has spent hundreds of thousands, millions on the town center area that is to be housing. So why isn't that filled up? Because, I mean, as you said, like houses are like going like this. So the retail aside, we've got, and I know, let me guess, the ground's gonna break this fall or this summer, right?
The housing market they're ready to break down. We had to wait for the Edison to put in electricity so that they could break down. So some things, like I said, you gotta be patient. I will say this, when they do, I bet you'll see those houses sell very quickly.
I look forward to it. Thank
All
you.
right?
Thank you.
Look forward to your patience.
Council, any additional questions? I just have one of my own, and we kind of opened up that line of discussion, so I do want to put that out there. Considering the investments we've made in the community and the one we recently made into the opportunity for industrial development. Obviously, there's interest and dialogue ongoing right now with somebody who could be a substantial impact to our community, to tax funds, to school tax funds. Is it prudent to pause on asking the community to vote on an additional 0.25% before we know if there is in fact something on the near future going to happen? I'd hate to ask for a tax, have the community support it and pay it, have the opportunity come through for industrial development, which would provide significant funds to our community. Because in my time on this rock, the one thing I know is anytime a tax is voted in, it never goes away. It's always repurposed into something else. Even if we do this, we will find a different way from the general fund with the other funds. So is the timing right to ask for this, considering our financial situation with our reserve fund well over $12 million and the need being about $2.5 million for 1 year? Is it worth a consideration to delay this until we have some clarification on some of that opportunity for development that could provide and eliminate the need for this if those tax revenues come in because of development?
Mr. President.
Yes.
Actually, there was taxes. We had 3 half a mil levies on our ballot we chose not to collect when we found out we didn't need them, the recreation, police and fire. And so we chose not to collect them. If we are successful in landing a big venture, the build out in that is on things of that magnitude are traditionally 5-6 years. So, and with collecting a year behind, it'd be a 6th or 7th year before we see those revenues. We would see the build out from the tradespeople working there, probably within 3 years. But still, that leaves us a lull to run the fire department. So I would say, and we're on a deadline right now, this, you really have to pass it next week. And we have there's gonna be a time delay before, even if we're successful, that we start to see the money from the revenues, the payroll income tax that the employees at this place and the people building it would be paying. So I think it's really the financial or the proper financial decision to actually take care of the fire department right now. And if everything works out in a great manner for us, we can choose to not collect certain amounts of the payroll income tax at a future time. But right now we're against the wall.
But I guess following up to that, and thank you, Mayor. We're expecting to have some type of decision on the opportunity that's at hand currently within the next few months.
That's correct.
That's what we believe to be the case, is within the next few months, we would know that. So if in fact we waited for, call it the dust to settle, if you will, on if something is going to happen in the industrial development, if we approve this in 2024, the tax revenue collection would start in 2025. Am I correct, Mr. Roman? Thank you. I thought I was correct in that. So if we gave it the 2, 3, 4 months, knowing we would miss the window to have this on for this November, the exposure to the city in carrying the additional funds is really a year. So if something happens, we would know how to plan and adjust accordingly. If it doesn't happen, we would know we'd have the capability of moving forward with this or with a dedicated property levy, whatever was chosen at this time. In essence, we're not delaying this by 6 or 7 years. The payoff from industrial development could be delayed 6 or 7 years, in which we'd have to come up with a stopgap plan for covering that if we consider that into that. But I guess that's the information or the opinion I would put forward is, without knowing what is going to happen or if something is going to happen, I'm hard pressed and challenged to ask the members of our community or those working in our community for an additional 0.25% when we may be able to achieve a similar thing without an increase, just over a different time period. So with that, I'd close. That's all I'd have to say on that. Anybody else, any questions, comments from council?
Mr. President, if I
Yes.
may.
Yes, please, Chief.
So during the strategic plan, when we talked about the sustainability model and what that looks like, one of the critical pieces in us applying for the SAFER grant is the sustainability plan to be able to show that we are going to be putting something on the levy, but are on the ballot for passage for the sustainability of these positions. But furthermore, just to kind of discuss of the difference between the property tax and the income tax, and the reason why we kind of landed on the income tax being the most fiscally responsible thing for us as the city of Oregon to do is because of our heavy industrial base. As we note that a lot of the refinery workers and a lot of people that come into the city to work, that those services, they receive all of our services, all the police and the fire services on a regular basis. And they do have to pay that. And so it essentially spreads that tax out amongst everybody instead of just specifically putting it on the property owner, which would then impact a lot of the senior citizens. Although we understand that the senior citizens do utilize our service quite often. However, being the fixed incomes and the things that sometimes just don't fit within that. And Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that we had broke this down to kind of look at it was that the average annual income or the average annual salary for an individual in the city of Oregon is around $60,000. A 0.25 increase, would be about $150 a year. So just about 42 cents a day. And granted, like 60,000, it varies, there's many of difference within there, but just to kind of give you the running, kind of estimate, I think on the last census I seen was around the 60,000 mark, which would be about $150 a year that would directly come out of their paycheck. So, and that would be for all people involved rather than just the property owner. So that's kind of really, to the reason of why we kind of landed on the least amount of impact, being the income tax.
Thank you, Chief. And I would also restate that in consideration of the income tax, what I will say in defense of it is, it does have the least amount of impact to, especially the seniors in our community. We're not tying it to property. And to your point, those that enjoy the services provided by our city are also sharing some of the costs of providing those services. Thank you, Chief. Council, any other questions or comment? Are you on?
Mr. President.
Mr. Solander?
I like what you had to say about if this was the right timing on that. So can I make a motion that we table this?
Motion can be made.
Pardon me?
It can be.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion we table this.
Needs a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Drake. We'll do a roll call vote for tabling. Ms. Ross, you take a roll call vote of council for tabling of item 63 of 2024.
Mr. Slander?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
No.
Mrs. Pauloff?
No.
Mr. Reeves?
No.
Mr. Wallensack?
No.
Thank you. Motion to table is not passed by a vote of 4 against 3 for. So with that, if there's no more question or comment, I'll seek a motion to move item 63 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President.
Ms. Ackerman.
I know we've spoke a lot about the higher end halves of the people with the great paying jobs, and we've spoke about the not having a burden on the property owners, and I can certainly appreciate that. But there's a huge population that we're just kind of breezing past, and that's just our average citizens, and they're the people that our service industry, our retail people that we desperately need, our restaurant people, and this little bit that you seem to minimize so easily, I mean, across the board in here tonight, it is a significant amount, and these things all a cumulative amount of all of these taxes, and it isn't just us. It's this county, it's the state, it's the feds, it's everybody, and we're overwhelmed. And I just think, I just want to speak out just once on behalf of everybody else that's between that high paying, tradesmen and certainly city, anybody in the government, they're doing pretty good for themselves. But the average citizen in Oregon, or the person that comes in here and God forbid they take the Tartar bus to come to work or whatever, the last thing they need is to get hit with any more taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. With that said, council, I'll seek a motion to move 63 to 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves, a second by Mrs. Pauloff to move item 63 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 63 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on is item 64 of 2024, kind of a two-parter. This is the resolution of necessity. With this, we'll go to Mr. Mazer.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is legislation that would put the property tax levy back on the ballot for the senior center the way it was written prior to last year. So we actually, staff and working with the area office on aging, went to the senior center to discuss what all of the options are. And one of them was because the county has a property tax levy for renewal. I think they're actually doing an increase this year. So for the countywide senior levy. And we had thought about and talked about having all of the senior center services provided by the county. In the end, we all met with the people at the senior center, and everybody was much more comfortable putting it on as a ballot item just for the city of Oregon only. So in this fashion, so it is the 0.5 mil levy that was on there like it was before in previous years.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mazur. And a quick question from myself on this one, because I know that they had tried to present this last year. It did not make the ballot because of some legal changes throughout that. Are we confident that we've met all those burdens to make sure, Ms. Purpura, I'd go to you on that?
Yes, Mr. President, we are confident. We did go to outside counsel like we did on the fire levy, who specializes in this, and we are confident. We've also been in communication with Lucas County Board of Election, and they are in the process of reviewing this and have reviewed it and made some suggestions.
Thank you, Mr. Purpura. Council, any questions on item 64 of 2024?
Mr. President.
Mr. Solander?
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there a reason why this one, we'll go back to my as an emergency question. So is there a reason why that this would have to be as an emergency?
I specifically can't answer that. I'll ask for the administration. Is there a reason for emergency outside of moving it forward faster?
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
Purpura.
President, Mr. Slender. This is in our charter that permits us to do it as an emergency, and due to the fact that there is a timetable that's a little bit tighter and more, there's more steps to this type of process, that's why we have it as an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Purpura. Does that answer your question? Very good, thank you. Council, any other questions on item 64 of 2024?
Mr. President,
Ms. Ackerman?
I question why it wasn't put on in March if we knew that we had, goofed in the wording, what have you, and that we weren't able to put on a ballot. Why didn't we put it on in March during the primary? And how much have we covered that had it passed? How much has the city covered to fill that gap? And why can't we continue to do so from whatever fund you were able to make up that difference in the meantime?
Okay, Mr. Roman, do you want to address that?
Nick?
So a major portion of the funds that are carrying over are leftover balances from the previous levy that had still run out. In the current year, we're estimating to spend an additional 150 to 200,000 of city funds on this levy. So that would just be in addition to the budget that's already constrained in every given year.
And the fund, I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
And the fund that, it was just general, and it was budgeted. It was general fund, reserve balance funds that were used and plugged in for, to budget for this year's.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Ms. Ackerman, with regards to your first question, why wasn't it put on for the March election? The Ohio Revised Code prohibits us from doing so. We can only do it in a general election.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Council, any additional questions on item 64? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to move item 64 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallensack?
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to move item number 64 of 2024 to next week's regular meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Wallensack, a second by Mr. Drake to move item 64 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 64 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Next item on the agenda is item 65, again presented by Mayor Michael Safarian, Public Service Director Paul Roman. Paul, I believe we're starting with you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to install stop signs at various intersections. They're all listed in section 1, but the bulk of them are on Whittlesea between Seaman and Star. It's at every cross street, and then the other intersections at Hollydale and Sonia. If you refer to the maps that are attached to the ordinance, you'll see that on Whittlesea, we currently have yield signs at these cross streets. And the same cross streets with Berlin all have stop signs, and it does seem odd, but when you drive Whittlesey, if cars park on Whittlesey, they do become a sight distance issue for the cross streets. So police department and the public service department did get together to talk about these intersections, and we've agreed the yield signs should become stop signs on those Whittlesey Avenue intersections. At Ansonia and Hollydale, we did have an inquiry, and really it's odd when you look at Adair Drive. It's a triangle shaped island there. Adair really needs to yield to Ansonia, and so if you look at that map, and then Ansonia needs to be the stop street at Hollydale. And if you look at that same map up at the top, you'll see Wren Drive with Sylvandale and Grassa Street. It's the exact same layout. We're saying, hey, that needs to go in at Adair and Sonia with Hollydale. So all it means is you're installing a stop sign for people who are driving in Sonia. They'll stop when they come up to Hollydale. And on Whittlesey, instead of the yields, you'll now have stop signs for all the cross streets coming out to Whittlesey between Seaman and Star. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions for the administration on item 65 of 2024?
Mr. President.
Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. Mr. Roman, I see the Hollydale and Ansonia one. That stop sign's gonna be on the other side of the Adair, correct?
It'll be, yeah, it'll see. So Adair really becomes Ansonia, and then it's just Ansonia out to even though it's all within 10 feet. Ansonia, the stop sign will actually be there for Ansonia at Hollydale, but it's a really wide intersection. It's really hard to see. Yeah, maybe if you zoom in better. I don't know if you can zoom in on that.
It looks funny to me. It looks like it's on the island area instead of being back.
Yeah,
on the corner of Ansonia and Adair. I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and it's just big symbols being used, but it'll be
That arrow's a yield though.
Yeah, there'll be a stop bar for Ansonia right at Hollydale.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Council, any additional questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Slander.
I really think we need a roundabout.
Well,
I think that, I think it would be really important we get a roundabout. And I think
We're just going to cut that off right there. Paul and I have been down this road enough times.
April Fools.
But I got to tell you, Rodney.
Mr. Roman, go ahead.
Rodney thought that the triangle shape could be the first triangle roundabout in Northwest Ohio. But the more you think about it, it's just odd, some of these streets, the way they're laid out like this, and it's not high traffic volume. But no, I can tell you, I have a whole public service department that agrees with you, Mr. Salander.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Paula. Thank you, Mr. Salander.
Mr. Roman, isn't that a park?
It
That's Euclid Park, correct?
Deer Park.
That is Euclid Park neighborhood.
Right, so, but that triangle, they always called it the triangle, but it is Euclid Park.
Well, the triangle itself is zoned as parkland.
Right,
It is a little park.
okay,
But that's Euclid Park subdivision.
right, no, I know that, thank you. I just wanted to point out that it was a park.
Thank you, Ms. Paula. And that, I believe, was something we moved on a few years ago to designate a lot of those open areas in the neighborhoods, the boulevards, if you would, as park space. I remember a few years back. Very good. Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Reeves.
Just real quick, I know we're talking about putting stop signs there, Mr. Roman. Would that, is there, and I don't mean a grace period, but are the citizens notified that live in that area? Is that how that works? I didn't catch that if you mentioned it.
Mr. Roman.
On the higher traffic areas, years ago when we went to four-way at Star and Lallendorf, we did put up solar message boards. I don't know if it'd go to that degree for this. You could do that here though, to say that there will be a future stop sign to warn motorists of what the plan is. You can do that ahead of time. So, but it is low traffic area for sure. So, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Any additional questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 65 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock.
Second.
Second by Mr. Solander. So I have a motion by Ms. Pollock, a second by Mr. Solander to move item 65 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 65 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Last item on the agenda for this evening is item 66 of 2024. Mr. Lamrick, I haven't forgotten you. I'll call you up as soon as we have presentation of this. We'll bring you forward to speak at that time. Okay? And for this, again, we'll go to the mayor and I believe to Public Service Director Paul Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is needed to enter into an encroachment agreement with Mr. Shane Manteuffel. If I say it wrong, let me know. What is it? Manteuffel. Okay, that sounds better. In order to allow a drive access to an unimproved right-of-way on Bleer Street, and this is between Grass Street and Wheeling. And if you look at that area, it is a flood zone for Otter Creek. And Mr. Manteuffel is planning to build a home on 4 of the lots that are on this Bleer Street right-of-way that are just east of Grasser Street, and which is the closest to this is the closest to his property. But Grasser Street, the problem is Grasser Street is very narrow. It is, and that is the primary concern is cars parking on this road. Grasser Street's almost like a half road, and the neighbors have serious concerns with any construction vehicles or anything else being parked in this right of way. I had sent an email to Shane regarding his request for this encroachment, and we were looking at, he wanted, yeah, that shows the areas in yellow, I believe, is what he owns. The blue is like the floodway there, if you're looking at the aerial. Anyways, we've done encroachment agreements before to allow driveways to go into a paper street, and we normally allow the design to be approved by the Public Service Department. But in knowing the concerns for this and the fact it's a very hilly area, I have concerns for drainage, I have the concerns of damaging the right-of-way, let alone affecting a private property. I've asked for a professional survey as a part of their design, as well as several conditions that we attach to the agreement itself. So if you look at Exhibit B in the encroachment agreement, at the very end, there's an email from my department that gives 5 items that need to be provided in order for the city to approve a drive in this paper street. And a lot of it has to do with just having to know exactly where everyone's property line is for where you're building something. I need to know if you're changing the grade, which it is hilly, that you're providing for drainage that's not going to have a negative impact on your own property, let alone any of the neighboring properties. And it does involve a stone construction entrance, which we'll need to see as a part of the design. And then we just need to see the alignment. But in terms of off-street parking, even if you're going to build this driveway, you really can't have vehicles parking on Grasser Street. It's going to be very limited to the people that are living there, and it definitely have a negative impact on them. So, Mr. Manteuffel, when I was talking with him, I said, you know, as much as you need all these things for design, I think it's best to first get an encroachment agreement before you spend a dime, because it's a lot of information I'm asking for. And before you spend that money, I would first, it's me, I'd want to know that I have permission through an encroachment agreement. So that's why this ordinance is before you. Okay. We've approved them in the past, but this one is a tough one. It's a difficult design. His properties are up a hill. So you look at the dead end of Grasser, it's like a half road. He has to go off into the woods and then up a hill. It's kind of a hard turn. And I know the property owner, and I don't know if Erin is here tonight or not. But if she's not, she's the neighbor who lives at the very end of the road. Her concern is simply when they park there, their fear is that when they pull out of their driveway, I know, Cassie, I probably should have gave you what I handed. I gave a handout, by the way, to council so that you could see it firsthand. So it's the property at the very end. Her concern is just pulling out of their driveway and they don't want to back up into a parked car. So she had concerns as to where the driveway would go. I sent her an email today. I said, well, no matter what happens through the encroachment agreement, I would certainly share any proposed designs with them, with the neighbors, and make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact on them. But the encroachment agreement is the first step as to whether we even allow them to proceed with design. So it's really up for council to decide. I'm not one way or the other. I don't think it has a negative impact as long as the driveway itself doesn't impact the neighbors that are already there. So, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Before council, we enter into our questions. I will bring Mr. Lambrick forward and let him share his thoughts and concerns. And Tom, we just ask you to state your name and your address for the record, please.
Tom Lambrick, 5238 Seaman Road, Oregon. The one thing on that, Paul, and everybody is, if you haven't been up there, if you go and look at the proposed line that Andrea had put out there, he doesn't even have 8 feet to the hill.
Yeah.
So to put in a encroachment, he's gonna have to cut into the hill.
Yeah.
That's already there, that goes up into the Lutheran property.
And
Go ahead, Mr. Roman,
Mr. President, Mr. Lambert, and that's the reason for the professional survey. Andrea is not a surveyor. We
I
tried to
understand that.
stake
I
it,
understand that. That's why I said
but he
proposed.
needs, and it is to protect your properties as well as the neighboring properties. I'm asking him to stake where the Bleer Street right of way is, as well as the Grasser Street right of way, to just make sure that he's not going to be on private property when he constructs this. And it's a very difficult access. It's right straight up a hill. There's a light pole there. I mean, it's not easy. And I don't know if he realizes all that. I think he was here earlier, and I don't know if he left, but I think it's a difficult design. And I said, if it's me, I'd first get the encroachment agreement. I wouldn't do the design and then try to get the encroachment and we say no. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Go ahead, Mr. Lambert.
You know, my dad talked to him a couple times and my dad said he was real polite when he talked to him, you know. But the last time he talked to him, they pulled up into the grass and everything else, and Dad walked out there and said, hey, you know, I'd rather you not park on the grass. He just said, I can park anywhere here at city property. Well, you know, like I mentioned the meeting before, you know, we maintain that. We try to be good neighbors to those, you know, to the neighbors there. So they look at something nice and not ruts and trash and all kinds of stuff, you know. So that's just my concern. I'm concerned about the neighbors. You know, they've been good neighbors to my dad. And that's, you know.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Mayor, go ahead.
And Tom, I'll say, I've been here for quite a while, and during that period, I bet I've seen 7 or 8 people entertain the idea of doing something there, and every one of them changed their mind.
Right.
You know, and to get on the point that Mr. Roman was making, very difficult. I think they were basically sold a pig in a poke, and they found out it would be real expensive to build back there.
And Mr. President, if I could make a comment.
Yeah, Mr. Roman,
Just
please.
that I spoke to Shane and I said, you know, if it was me, I would look honestly at an access through the Lutheran homes, which is, it's like flat grade. You cross one swale, but you'd have direct access to all your properties and you wouldn't be going up a hill. But I think he still is going to want a residential drive through that paper street. So it's just not as easy as they think, is all I'm saying.
Understand.
Mr. President?
Mrs. Pollock.
So what comes to my mind when I see this is he going to change the flow?
Mr.
Go ahead.
President,
That's gonna-
that's a real good question.
It's gonna
He-
flood out
he-
all
he
those
cannot
other
build.
houses.
All right, so first of all, he cannot build in the floodway at all. He would have to do a serious hydraulic study, and I know he's not planning to do that. It's really the first 4 properties that he owns right at Grasser Street, so just east of it. So they're all, only the 4th one, just the corner of it, is in the floodway, but his home would be on the very first 2 parcels right up against Grasser, which are out of the floodway. Okay, so he can still have property and he can plant grass and he can do certain things, but he can't change the shape of the floodway. No, he cannot affect the waterway. That's a good
So is
question.
is there any thought to erosion or?
Well, no, he's up and out of the floodway itself for this drive access, and the home
'Cause in
itself.
the picture, it looks like it's in the floodway.
Yeah, well.
Or is that just the property?
All right,
Where is he
so
planting the
if
property?
if you see the yellow that's outside the blue,
Mm-hmm,
right? That's the area where he'd have a home in the drive. Yep,
okay.
yep.
Yeah.
But that's a good question because you can't be down in the floodway.
Right, because I mean, there's a lot of water coming off of Luther Hills.
Correct.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock. Mr. Lambert, please conclude.
I mean, the only thing is, it's just that, it's, my biggest concern is, and Dad's biggest concern is he hasn't necessarily followed the rules that you set before.
Well,
And
Mr. Lambert, just so you know, my set of rules were after that whole incident where
Right.
he's up in there doing whatever.
Right, right. So, and that's only our concern. He went in and destroyed trees on my property. And I'm not happy about it, but it's water under the bridge now. There's nothing you can do about it. And that's just our biggest concern. Is just have respect for the surrounding property.
Very good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Mr. Roma, just a quick question, just to make sure that I understand. So he's, looking at this, Grasser is running horizontally across above the blue to the yellow section. That would be Bleecker Road that's coming in between the two blue dotted lines just to the left of the yellow as we look at this, just to make sure I'm orienting.
That's correct.
All right, so his intent is to build on the westernmost two lots in that
Yes.
area?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so he's looking to build on the first two.
That's correct.
Okay,
And yeah, and so, and I think the main concern with the resident living at the very end, they just don't want that drive to interfere with how they currently park or back out of their driveway now. And I agree with them. And so it's a matter of, trying to meet their concerns or needs as well as Mr. Mantufel's wish as well. So that's the hard part. And it is hilly. It's actually difficult. It's a
Thank you.
difficult drive construction.
thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any additional questions?
Mr. Horniak,
Mr.
or
Reed,
Mr. President, excuse me, I'm sorry.
good enough. Mr. Reeves.
Mr. Lambrecht, maybe I'm just not smart enough, but I'm trying to figure out, where is your property located?
I'd ask you to come forward so we can get you on the mic.
I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I'm confused at where,
If I could get that from you,
Oh,
Steve.
yep.
Tom's properties, Terry, are right across from Shane's properties as well on Bleecker.
This is my property here. And then Shane's property is up here.
okay, so you have all of
Yeah,
that.
I think it's the
Oh,
majority
okay.
of those properties. I believe.
And he's trying,
If you go back to that map before, we have this lot, these first 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. We own those 7 here, and then these 4. So, 1, 2, 3, 4.
so your property is right in all the flood zone, right?
Yeah, all ours is all.
In the floodplain there. Okay. And he's trying to
He's gonna come in here.
oh, yeah, that's why I can't see
Tom,
it.
you may
Oh,
want
I'm
to
sorry.
point to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. I'm sitting there looking, I can't find the red dot.
Like a bunch of cats.
Right, there you go.
Come off of here. up in here.
Yeah, well, the yellow would be where the house is, but yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hill right along here. There's a hill that comes up.
Mr. President,
There's a difference in elevation there.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Pollock.
So that blue dotted line in front of his property across from Mr. Lambrick's, that's a paper street?
Yeah.
It's, but it's a, but it's,
Thank you.
it's
Bleecker,
not,
Bleecker.
okay, but it's
Bleecker is
not paved, it's just a paper street.
correct, it's all woods.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock.
Thank you.
Council, any additional questions?
Mr. Horniak.
Mr. Walczak.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. If we pass this or next week and he doesn't abide by these, what's our mechanism to stop him?
Well, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Mr. Roman.
Mr. Walzak, he really can't do any physical work without an approved design for the driveway. And there needs to be a construction entrance. We need a professional survey. He can't do any of that. So there'd be a stop work order immediately if he's out there cutting trees down just because the encroachment agreement passes. He would need to provide professional. So he would get a stop work order to be stopped by the police.
But like Mr. Lambrick, he hasn't abided by.
Well, that's what happened last
things.
time. He started cutting trees down and we sent the police out
Yeah.
and stopped them.
I just want to make sure that we're there for the residents if this happens.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. President,
Ms. Spallo.
Mr. Roman, is the survey going to be done before next week?
No, this is, keep in mind, this is council's approval to allow somebody to use an unimproved right of way for a driveway, to put a driveway in an unimproved right of way. Normally, under these agreements, we leave it, and it's written this way as well, to leave it to the Public Service Department to approve a design at some later point. But I also attached the requirements of what I'm going to require for that approval as a part of the agreement as well. But this agreement does get put on their, with their recorder's office, it does get put on their property. So it's there. And keep in mind, if the public were to provide, let's say we're never going to build a road across Otter Creek, okay? But if there was some other improvement that we needed to go through and it affected his driveway, he has to remove his driveway at his cost as a part of this agreement. Shouldn't be on the public who owns the right of way to be, because we're allowing him to build a driveway when we don't have to. So because we are, he has to have insurance that covers it, which is part of this encroachment agreement. And if the city has any other public needs that go through there, he has to deal with that cost for us to put in our improvement.
So with this ordinance, it makes the paper street go away?
No, the paper street remains.
Okay.
It just allows someone to encroach in a public right of way. That is the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spallo.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
Mr. Roman, this is permit driven too, correct? Through the city?
Yeah, that's correct. So the ordinance, the encroachment agreement is between the city and the property owner, but they still have to get the permits for the drive access, for the homes, and for the construction entrance. Yes.
Okay. And none of that has taken place yet, correct?
Well, he first applied as a work in the right of way permit, but the more we saw it, I asked him, I said, well, is this, he did the work in the right of way permit as if it was a temporary drive. And I said, well, is this going to become permanent? And he says, yeah. Well, if that's the case, you need the encroachment agreement, and that's why it's here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Council, any additional questions?
Mr. President?
Mrs. Ackerman.
Thank you. Now, I learned a lot in looking into this. I didn't understand about the paper road, how that works legally, the division of it, who it's offered to and that. So if the Lambrecht family had years ago wanted, well, and maybe it's a matter of just paperwork, I don't know, but their wishes were fully known by the city that the paper road, that they had an interest in it. Well, then I learned that it would be if the parties on the property owners on both sides of the paper road would have the right, if they're both interested, to divide that then and
Yep.
split it in half, correct?
Yeah, one
Additional
avenue,
purchase.
yeah, you're right.
So how is, I mean, it's like the Lambrecht family has been wanting to get that, have, their half of that easement or of that paper road.
One avenue, not to
Okay.
cut you short.
Yeah,
but
no, please.
All right, so another way of doing all this is you could petition to vacate the right of way, vacate the paper street.
Mhm.
But it is, when you go and do that, you do have to get the majority of the people requesting it. You gotta make sure that when you vacate it, you don't landlock somebody, number one. And as long as you don't landlock someone, when you vacate it, each half of that right of way gets offered to the side that is contiguous with it.
Okay.
So in some cases, some people may not want it, and then one side may buy all of it. But no matter what we do as a city, we can't landlock a property. So there is an obligation for the city to provide access to one's property through the right of way, even if it's unimproved, okay? But that is another avenue. You could vacate the right of way, and that happens all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 66 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves, a second by Mrs. Pauloff to move item 66 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 66 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Concluding all the agenda items for this evening, we'll move on to the mayor's report. Mayor.
No report.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mazur.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thanks, Mr. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mrs. Pauloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to give a big kudos to the police department. They today apprehended the suspect that was involved with the robbery with the postal worker at Piccadilly. So good work with that. I heard it was an awesome take. So thank you for that. And that is all for my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. Mr. Wallenczak.
No report this evening, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Sackerman.
I'm hoping that we have a good number of people going to the Tree City, USA in Defiance. I don't know if we have a head count yet, Cassie, how many people are going? Do you know?
She believes two
Just two?
thus far.
Well, besides me, then, or you mean two from the city? Just me?
Keith will end up going.
Okay, okay.
Keith goes.
So it's more than two. All right, and this isn't for my standing committee, but it seemed to be a great source of concern, last week. I should have done this last week, but for anybody that has a concern about my conflict of interest, potential conflict of interest in my abstention last week, in farming any Jolin property, there for well over a decade has been an understanding that it's year by year and it's can always be sold, that is their desire. There's no written contract. It's always just year by year as it goes. So there was no expectation on my part of any income from that property. And I just want to share this because it was really upsetting to some folks. But this is a voicemail from Gary Jolin from February 22nd of 23 that we received, and I don't know why I kept it, mostly because I don't clean off my my stuff out of my voicemails and stuff. But I just want to play this so that you understand that as of February last year, our last crop was in 22. February of 23, I wasn't on council, wasn't even running yet. Nothing, what the owner called and said the following. And so I just want to enter that.
Before you play that, Mrs. Ackerman, just to make sure, just to kind of put it on the record. So your intent is to play Mr. Jolin's voicemail message for the record here
to
tonight.
me and letting me know that the city was in control as of February of 23. The city was already in control of that property and I had no expectation of farming it. I was not losing any money. The understanding was always if they could sell it, they'd sell it. So I just want to make this a matter of record since it was
Sure, go
so
ahead and play it.
concerning to some folks. If I can.
Joe, I just wanted to get with you about the property down.
Oh, hang on a sec. I screwed it up. I need my kids. No. Where's the IT guy? Hold on a sec.
Hey, Beth, this is Gary Joe, and I just wanted to get with you about the property down there. The power plant finally bought that 22 acre section, and they're going to use the bottom half for their laydown area. I just wanted to get with you about that. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Slander.
No report from my standing committee, but just a quick thing too. Just want to, once again, just thanking everybody for coming out here for the meeting and for your input and your participation. It makes me very happy to see that. And also, I just want to just kind of thank all the rest of the council here as well for some good conversation this evening. I think that's important as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slander. Mr. Drake.
No report from my committee, but I just want to thank Paul Roman, his engineering department, and Brandon Began and Assistant Chief Spangler with looking into those stop signs, because told Paul there's a guy beat me up every time I see him, and I invited him 5 times here, but he never comes. So I'm sure he'll be happy when you put him up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. And I have no report from my standing committee. I would just echo the comments. I want to thank everybody for being here again this evening. Said it many times before. We work better when there's a crowd around us. I would like to thank members of council and the administration for the, I'll say, active engagement and discussion regarding several of the items tonight, but specifically to the proposed ballot action for increase of the income taxes. Certainly one of the, I'll say, most serious items a city can consider is that of levying taxes onto their public. So I do appreciate everybody's comments, everybody's engagement to the conversation. Look forward to probably more of so the same next week. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their efforts. With that, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Hang on. Okay, and I had asked you to just let me know which item you wanted to speak before. All right, I'll give you a moment to speak now. Mr. Reeves will hold the motion for a second for a brief intro because she did sign in.
My name is Ruth Price and I live at 5255 Seaman Road. I have some questions for the fire department. You talked a couple weeks ago about a staircase that one of your firemen fell off of. Is that correct?
You can go ahead and respond.
No, that's not correct. There
That
wasn't,
it was going to have to be,
we need to purchase a staircase for the
I'm
fire.
sorry?
We need to purchase a staircase for the fire department.
Okay.
Yep.
And this housing, I think way back when they were talking about it before you were here,
Mm-hmm.
they were talking about having some full-time workers for the fire department. And this housing, why wasn't that addressed at the beginning when you were in the process of going to build this? Why is it something that's going to have to be added on now at a further expense? I don't understand that. Why weren't those provisions made back then?
Mrs. Price, I think there might be a misunderstanding on what we're doing at the fire department. What we're doing at the fire department is adding a staircase to a storage area. The housing is already in the fire station. And
Okay.
so there's already enough to sleep 12 firefighters there at Station 41. And so the staircase and railing that we had talked about that's going to be installed is for the opposite end of the fire station. So above the turnout gear room, there's an open area, and it would be to provide a railing around that area and a staircase to that area so we can store EMS supplies and other goods as far as cleaning supplies and such.
Okay. How do we stand right now with our volunteers? I mean, are we still utilizing those men? I'm sure we are, because I had one in my house a couple of weeks ago. But how are they standing? Are they these 12 firemen that you want to hire? Are these men being able to be applied? Are they being reconsidered for a full-time position?
So we actually don't currently have any volunteers. We have all either part-time or I talk about 3 different tiers. We have a local responder, part-time that works at the station, and or full-time person. all of the people at the fire department do receive compensation for every single run that they come to, every training that they attend, and it's all an hourly rate. As far as what I think the group that we're kind of referring to would be what the local responder is. And they live within a certain district closest to the station. Their pager goes off on times when there's a structure fire, motor vehicle accident that receives extrication, certain higher acuity calls that would require additional personnel. And then they respond into the station. So that number has declined over the years, significantly in the last, I would say, probably in the last maybe 10 years, Rich, 5-10 years, it's really kind of gone up. But I would say we're at 5 years would probably be more accurate as far as the heavy decrease. But in the last, I would say as we sit right now, we actually were accepting applications up until April 1st. We'll be reviewing those for, again, local responders, part-time employees and such. And it's just the way that our society, our community has changed, when I talk about 3,500 runs, that's a lot of runs. And so I think the general, mixture of EMS and fire, which is what really requires a lot of, these additional calls or needs for service of the local responder, or, could be a volunteer, but they do get paid. I just want to be, clear on that. And so although there's a decrease, it's the change in where they've kind of grown out of it. Individuals such as Rich here himself has been doing it for 30 years. And doing it for 30 years, there's not individuals that are coming in now to replace the individuals that have been doing it for 30 years. But 30 years ago, the call volume was quite different. My dad was a volunteer for many years. And so when you only get called a few times a month is a lot different than getting called a few times a day. And so that's the difference. Is we're trying to, this 12 additional firefighters will help us supplement or decrease the amount of times that Rich's pager will go off. So he can still be a part of the fire department, still be an active member of the fire department, but it also fits within it where it's not necessarily a burden on the individuals that don't want to do it on a regular basis.
So we're not going to lose these volunteers that want to continue to volunteer.
Absolutely not. And that's been the stance that, and Rich can contest to this, anybody in here could contest to the fact that ever since I took this position, I said that I will always maintain a combination department. And the reason for the combination department is simply because we can put out for a local responder. So if an individual straight out of high school in Clay High School wants to be a firefighter, they can come down to the Oregon Fire Department. We can hire them. We can send them to EMT school. We can send them to fire school. They can be hired part-time, and then they can kind of essentially move all the way up to what we've just seen in the last year, where 2 of our part-time individuals have transitioned. Miss Stacy Hartwig, a firefighter paramedic that we hired full-time from, that was a permanent part-time before, and then full-time Battalion Chief Thomas Saunders, both came from that part-time staff.
Okay. What is the status for number 2 and number 3 fire stations?
So number 3 fire station will be no change. We still do house a medic and an engine out there. We have great response. As I stated earlier, we looked at the internal things of how we could maybe adjust where our local responders are. So for example, and I'm Rich, because you're here, I'm using you as an example. Rich was previously assigned to station number 41 as a local responder, meaning if a general alarm went off, he would respond to station 41. We looked at this on the basis of requests by them, is that maybe that because of them responding into 41, there may not be apparatus there if there's individuals already at that station that are responding out. So we've taken and re-looked and redivided our lines and moved individuals to different stations. So with that being said, that it increased the amount of local responders that could respond to station 43, and then they could respond that apparatus out there at a quicker time. And I will say station 43 gets out the door pretty well. They do have good response, anywhere between 3 to 7 individuals that will respond there for a general alarm. Whereas station 42, even though we were able to reassign some of the people from station 41 to station 42, still a lower response. We still only get maybe about 1 to 1 to 3. I would say 3 on a good day, 1 majority of the time, for the general alarm. And so that's kind of how it paints the picture of why we need those 12 individuals, but it doesn't change anything on the request, because even on a structure fire, 12 individuals at the station is going to be not only taking care of the additional EMS calls that we're seeing now today and the increase of the 10, but also what we're going to see down the road. So we'll always need the subsidy of all the local responders to respond to their stations and bring out that apparatus to the structure fires as well.
I appreciate it.
Yep.
There were some things here that were sort of in the gray area, and I was concerned about them.
Sure.
The other thing is, first of all, I have to say that I'm probably the oldest citizen of Oregon that comes and listens to you people. And I've objected for 2, 3, 4 years that I come and I cannot hear the majority of you people speaking. I can hear Mr. Horniak. I can sort of hear the mayor. I can hear Mr. Reeves because he speaks into the microphone. I can hear Mr. Drake. I can sort of hear Mrs. Ackerman. But the rest of you, law director, I didn't get a word you said. If we can't utilize the PA system that we have, which I understand was upgraded and it was a lot of money, I think we need to go to something that hooks onto your head so that the microphone is here. I object to that. I pay. I come here a lot. You know I come here a lot. Yes, I have hearing aids, but that doesn't make any difference. I think I have the right to hear what you have to say. If I'm putting myself out to come and sit here for 2.5 hours, I think I should have a right to hear what you're saying. Did I make myself clear?
I heard you.
Okay. I didn't quite understand about the senior center thing.
In what regard?
Are you trying to allocate more money for that?
No, that's a resolution of necessity, which allows them to appear on the ballot in the fall.
Okay, but are they going to ask for an increase?
I believe they're asking for the same amount as they've been voted before, correct? For
Mr.
their
President.
millage, Mayor.
And Ruth, we were unsuccessful at getting it on the ballot for a renewal. And all they allow us to do is put on a replacement. So it's a replacement asking for the same amount. How many was the levy? $500,000. All right, $500,000. But being that it's new, there will be a slight increase because the valuations went up. We were told the information we gave to the Board of Elections would get us on the ballot. There were some changes and we felt we were kind of not given good information down there and we didn't get on the ballot. So it's merely, this was the next opportunity we had to put that same levy back on the ballot.
So is this going to be a renewal, but it's also going to have an increase?
It is
Sounds
a
like it's a
renewal. 'Cause
replacement.
It's a replacement. We are not permitted to put a renewal on because that expired. So the
Okay.
closest thing we can do is put on a replacement levy. And in essence, the money we didn't collect over several years, we'll get back. It's kind of for a while, it's a wash. But I'm going to be honest with you. It is a slight increase because it's based on more current property valuations. So there is a slight increase.
My concern is, and you and I had this discussion, was about property taxes.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of seniors in Oregon. I think I heard maybe a couple years ago that we were still the majority out here,
Who are the seniors?
the seniors.
Yeah, and that's why we chose not to
Yes.
put,
Yeah.
another levy on. We don't collect 3 that we could, and we chose to deal with the safety services with a payroll income tax.
my concern is that, and I'm not objecting to it, that we have this facility for the people that want to utilize it. But there are so few people utilizing it.
Utilizing the senior center?
Senior Center.
I,
I
I
mean,
go by it
very-
occasionally and I thought it was fairly well attended, the different events. I wasn't aware that it's not attended very well.
I know people that go there, but because of what East Toledo offers at Navarre Park, many of those seniors are going to that facility instead of Oregon's. That's
I'll take
something you might wanna
look,
into.
but I actually did, I was
But
under the
still, I mean,
opinion that it was being.
We hold
fairly-
our meetings there, so I know what the
All right.
facility is. But it just seems like, okay, I'm gonna be paying a lot of money that so few of us are using.
And I believe that's
Mr.
fair
President.
enough. Comments are well said and probably information we could pass on with the leadership from the senior center and their board. I know I've been there on multiple occasions where there has not been a seat in the house.
Yeah.
On many occasions that I
Yeah.
have been there. So I've seen hundreds of people going there. Exactly so. So we've seen them there quite a few times. Anything else, Ms. Price, because we do want to,
I haven't started going there because I haven't gotten that age. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Price.
It was an interesting meeting, very interesting. I'm sorry so few people were here.
Thank you, Ms. Price. And I guess speaking to what Mrs. Price had said, I would just ask all council members and members of the administration, the microphones do work best when we are close to them and speaking into them. For also the people that are online, viewing via streaming services online, they can't hear us if we're not speaking in microphones. So I just give a reminder before we go to headsets, we'll see if that can help the cause a little bit, make sure we're speaking there. So continue on. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves for adjournment. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Wallenczak. Council, any objections to adjournment? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned.